Okay, so I would like to show you guys how to make some textures using bone dry clay. Now, the trick with working with bone dry clay is that it doesn't want to stick to itself at all. Generally, when clay is bone dry, you're just out of luck. But I'm going to show you a little bit of a trick, and I'm going to go with about a 1/2 inch slab. So I'm going to go a little bit thicker because I'm going to embed these bone dry pieces into my slab. Now, I would be careful about using this as a textural element on the side of like pots and stuff like that, depending on how thick your clay is. So if I'm a little bit thicker, it should be able to handle that bone dry clay being pushed, like kind of embedded into the clay body without cracking too much, but it could definitely encourage cracking, just because we have something that's so wet that hasn't shrunk yet, and then our bone dry pieces have already shrunk, and so as the wet clay shrinks around the bone dry pieces, they won't shrink together, so that can cause cracking. But we're using this as a texture, and there's definitely ways to go around it. So I have my slab that I didn't use from another project, and so I'm just breaking all of that. And you can tell it's bone dry because look at that color change, and also look at how it's breaking. And I made the slab that I'm working on, you saw that I scored it and then put a bunch of water on it and just kind of gooped it around so that I have kind of a nice goopy surface to work with. And then I'm just going to start embedding these pieces in. Now you could embed this however you want, and I think it's really interesting. The textures that you can get with bone dry clay or really stiff leather hard clay are much different than what you're going to get with a wet clay or even a leather hard clay. So I encourage you to play around with all of those different textures to see what it is that you can get and what's going to work too. Because you might put something together, you love it, but then you find out after you fire it that it just does not stay together. Now this should stay together, but it is going to have some like structural integrity issues. But once I get the glaze on here, it should be totally fine. If I can get it through that process, then it's good to go. So as you can see, I'm just starting to kind of lay these out. I kind of am thinking of like along the lines. Remember, we're gonna hang this on a wall. So I'm kind of thinking about those brick wall tiles that you see that people like, it's a fabrication thing. I'll find you a picture. I'm thinking about that and just kind of how I'd like to structure that and to sort of give myself kind of a more of a kind of rocky, rough, maybe even jagged looking texture. And I can just kind of lay them out now. Once I put them in there, it's really hard to replace them because I am really counting, like, as I stick them in there, they actually don't come out very easily after they've sat in there for a second or two, because they do start to bond into, like, that really dry clay will want to stick to that wet clay, the very wet clay. And that's a key feature, is that you really do have to be you can't be putting it into leather hard clay or even just dry, like a fresh rolled slab. You really do need to kind of make that surface kind of goopy. And I'll just line these guys up, and we can fast forward through this little section, a little whoop. Okay, so now I've gotten, I think, most of my area like kind of complete. So I'm going to check and make sure that I got my 4 inches. And I want it to be a little bit over 4 inches, but I really won't be able to cut through those bone dry tiles. So it's going to be a little bit of a trick to make sure that that like works out properly. So I'm going to cut it a little bit bigger than I want. I do want this to go, I want my texture to really fill that whole square, but I'll just kind of cut off the sections that I can easily right now and get kind of as close as possible. Again, I'm still looking to create that square tile. And so that one little piece is kind of in the way. So I'm going to see if I can kind of like saw through it, which the answer is not so much. So I can start to carve it off a little bit or just carve around it because that'll be easier. I'll deal with that in a second. All right, let's go back and we'll check our width again. So it's getting like close. I need to cut off a little bit. And I can also see some places where I might want to add another like chunk of clay or something along those lines. So that chunk is just too big. So if I can get a little bit of water in there and then I can pop that chunk back, a more different chunk back in there. If I tried to put it in without water, it definitely would not stay because it's already absorbed most of that water. And I'll fill in these other little chunks over here. And then I want to get really close to all of my edges. Now I've been working on this for a while, so I kind of like stuck it into the table pretty good without like moving it around. Recommendation, guys, if you want to like learn a lesson, maybe put it on a piece of newspaper. But I am going to use this to my advantage in just trying to get it to fit within that 4-inch square by compressing it all down. And you can see that starts to actually make it a little bit better of a square. Now trying to get it up, because it is really stuck onto the table, real careful like. And I have to be careful because when I pulled that up, it totally changed the angle. And it's also, remember that those bone dry pieces aren't movable at all. So I'm just going to kind of sprinkle some more water over the top of this so that it like has a little bit more of a chance to start to try to bond into itself. Let's see if I can change that shape some more. So I like my texture. But let's make sure that it actually is all kind of fitting and making, and it's still not quite a square, so I'm going to work on that. My 4 inches are looking okay-ish. I have a little bit of space that I want to like work on, so I'm just going to tap that into the table again to kind of shape that a little bit more. And also make my edges nice. Your edges should be pretty. There's no reason why any part of this piece shouldn't be considered. All right, clean off my surface, put that down, and it looks like I have a piece. I'm excited.